This is our 1.
2.
So we're caught up in drama. Everybody's talking. We're caught up in problem. Everybody's talking.
2 nerds here.
Hi there.
You're all here to learn how to gut a school bus, but before we do that, a little about us.
We're just 2 nerds about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime.
An adventure across the country to see what we see.
Learning every step of the way in our 40-foot school bus. If you'd like to follow our project and our journey, please subscribe to our YouTube page or go to our website at twonerdsandabus.com.
That being said, I want to say we have never done a project like this before. It's a massive undertaking and so many things can go wrong.
We're hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst as we embark on this adventure in June of 2017.
Our video will cover the tools, the skills, and the steps necessary to gut your school bus.
But every bus is different.
That being said, your school bus may have an engine in the rear or a handicap lift, and we will not cover that.
You might have a short bus, or you might have additional emergency exits that we will not be covering.
As with all projects, you're going to want to research every aspect of it. So meet our best friend,
Mr. Google. This project is not unlike any other project we've undertaken, and we had to do a ton of research before gutting the bus.
And even after that ton of research, we still weren't fully prepared for the project that we undertook, learning every step of the way. But before we get to the main part of this post, a message from Batman.
Safety first.
Your livelihood is more important than anything you could be working on. That being said, if you're working with power tools, you want to exercise extreme caution because you can hurt yourself and those around you.
You should take every safety precaution that you can when working on a project like this, and never, ever skimp on your safety glasses.
This is a do as we say and not as we do situation. Just be smart and stay safe.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go over all the tools and items you're going to need when gutting your bus.
We're going to go over all the tools that we used and give some insight into some items that we wish we would have had, so get your shopping lists ready.
First off, safety gear.
Safety glasses, work gloves, respirator masks, work boots, tight-fitting clothing, long sleeve and pants, earplugs. Next, you're going to want a few hammers and prying tools.
Curved claw hammer, rubber mallet, sledge hammer, pry bar. Other tools that were useful:
a punch to tap out rivets, putty knife or scraping tool, heat gun. Items we wish we had:
laser rust remover, face shield, automotive jack. Depending on the type of bus you have, you may be faced with more rivets than you know what to do with.
Or you might end up with a ton of screws like the integrated coach buses have.
Either way, you're going to want an assortment of driver bits.
We used flathead bits, we used hex bits with security pins, we used Phillips head bits.
You're also going to want to get a set of cobalt drill bits, and they're made specifically for drilling into metal.
We recommend getting more than one though, because you might break a couple.
We broke a few along the way. You also need a decent automotive socket set for the larger bolts that you'll need to remove.
What else do we use?
We used power tools. The battle between pneumatic and electric power tools is an old one, and we're not going to get into that here. Either one will work for this purpose, so whatever you have will be fine. Angle grinder, drill, air chisel.
Okay, can we get to the steps now?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now, did you say yes, sir? I think he said yeah, sure.
Step 1.
Removing the seats.
Removing the seats wasn't too terrible. We got a process down, and after we figured that out, it went pretty smoothly. We first started by cutting the bench legs with a cut saw, but that was just going to leave the brackets on the ground, and we ended up getting an angle grinder to grind the bolts out.
While he went through with the angle grinder, I went through with a set of socket wrenches and removed all of the bolts that were holding the seats to the frame of the bus, and also using just a cordless drill, went through and got all the cushions out.
The partitions up front between the seats and the driver were probably the most difficult part. They were bolted to the wall in an area that I couldn't get at with the angle grinder, so luckily the Hulk showed up and smashed them out.
We also removed all the handrails and the hardware from the front step area. Most of it was pretty easy, just using a drill we were able to get it out, but some of the bolts were so rusted they had to be taken out with the angle grinder.
We ended up scrapping the benches for about $100 at a scrapyard.
Bonus.
Bonus.
Step 2.
Remove the heaters.
So we had to remove the old floor heaters that were inside the bus. And at first, when we started, we had no idea what that whole system was attached to.
Yeah, if you are not a mechanic, you might want to get one because this is all tied into your engine's coolant system, and that's what keeps your engine cold. Not really cold, but cools your engine.
So we had to go through and actually cut the lines and drain the entire coolant system.
Well, gravity drained it. We just picked them up.
True. But we used a couple 5-gallon buckets, sharp knife, and sliced the lines, drained it out, and Scott was able to temporarily reroute our coolant system until we could get it into a shop to get it completely flushed and cleaned up.
For a price.
For a price.
Step 3.
Removing the runner rails and rubber mat on the floors.
It's pretty easy to remove the rubber mat and runner rails. We just used some pry bars and muscle.
Honestly, we would pick up a piece, cut it, and it would sort of just peel itself off. So, easy process.
Step 4.
Removing ceiling and wall panels.
Removing the ceiling wall panels involved a lot of rivet removal. There's an angled piece right above the windows that we were able to remove with just screws, but everything else was a buttload of rivets.
We used a combination of a hammer and punch, an air hammer, and pry bars and pure muscle to get most of them out.
The air hammer did a lot more damage to the panels than we were wanting, so we wanted to keep them as in good of condition as possible, and we went back to using a pry bar.
Now, caution. The ceiling panels are a lot heavier than they look, and we would recommend you get at least a handful of helpers to help you out. Scott kind of got into a rhythm of removing them, became a rivet-removing beast, and we knocked it out.
When we were ending our project getting the walls down, we fell back into this rhythm of using an angle grinder to cut across the head of the rivet and then an air hammer to chisel the head of the rivet off. And I wish I would have learned that sooner because it would have saved us a buttload of time.
Tons of time.
Step 5.
Removing the plywood.
To remove the plywood, we had to pry it up with hammers and pry bars. They were nailed down and glued, and it was pretty difficult.
Most of it wasn't too bad until we got to the back of the bus where the wood that was down had not been dampened, and it was a nightmare to pry up.
We ended up using a 2x6 with an angle cut in it, hammered it in as a wedge, and we eventually got them all up.
Knowing what we know now, if we had to do it again, we would have gotten an automotive jack of some sort to stick under there and jack up those floorboards because, whew,
It was a nightmare.
rough. Step 6.
Removing the covers on the stairs.
So the first time we attempted to remove the rubber matting on the steps, it was so bad we gave up, actually.
It was pretty hard. It was so glued down, and when we finally dug into it, there's a piece of metal that sat below the rubber that had been screwed into the stair structure.
Once we finally got the matting off, the top and bottom stair turned out okay. A little bit of rust, but not too bad. The middle step, completely covered in rust. Holes, just bad. So that whole thing is going to have to be completely replaced. But I think we kind of lucked out overall.
I think so. We ended up using about 3 pry bars to pry up those pieces of metal.
And Scott bounced on them.
Yep,
And it worked.
it worked.
Gotta do what you gotta do.
Step 7.
Cutting out rust spots and grinding down surface rust.
After we pried up the subfloor, there were a few rusty spots, but only 2 bad ones.
2 bad spots were located in front of the back wheel wells. 2 small spots that had to be ground out and covered with fiberglass.
We used a wire brush on a drill and the angle grinder to remove the rust from the floor. This would have been a great time for an army of helpers or a laser rust remover.
Now, we want to post this as caution. Make sure that anytime you are dealing with rust, you are wearing the proper protection, including your respirator masks and your eye protection. Rust is some nasty stuff, and you do not want that in your system.
And for ladies out there, you're going to want to cover your hair, and gentlemen if you care about your hair, because debris is flying everywhere.
Bandanas work really well, as you'll see.
We also used 2 box fans to push the dust out the back of the bus while we systematically moved from front to back.
And then we swept and vacuumed the bus.
And then we ground down some more of the bus that had rust left on it.
And then we swept and vacuumed the bus
And
again.
then we were pretty much rust-free.
Pretty much rust-free.
Step 8.
Filling all the holes with SteelStik and fiberglass.
After we removed the seats, the hardware, and the subfloor, we were left with a bunch of bolt holes and nail holes.
We consulted Mr. Google on how best to proceed.
Some people glued pennies to the floor.
Some people melted
Melded metal.
Some people welded metal onto the floor.
We ended up using a silicone caulk that didn't really want to stick to the metal.
So we went with a product called SteelStik.
It works as a 2-part putty, and when you knead it together, it becomes as hard as steel.
This worked perfect on all the small holes in the bus, but we also had to use fiberglass for the large holes. Step 9.
Treating the rust spots with phosphoric acid.
Treating rust is a very important step in this process. We went with a product that we got from Home Depot called Prep and Etch, which is a phosphoric acid treatment.
It works basically by converting iron oxide into iron phosphate, which stops rust in its tracks.
It worked pretty well. We no longer have rust on the floor, but it did turn the rusty areas to black and left a really nasty white residue.
The black rusty areas is supposed to be what it does. The white residue, however, is not. We contacted Mr. Google, and he told us that no paint was going to stick to that white residue, and it needed to go. Step 10.
Wash down all the phosphoric acid and make sure it's dried.
To make sure we got all the white residue off the ground, we busted out the power washer and went to town.
We sprayed the entire floor down, scrubbed it down, air dried it, and towel dried it.
We definitely covered any electrical systems that we didn't want to get wet.
Absolutely.
But after we got it washed down and dried, we were ready to paint.
24 hours later, here we go.
Step 11. Spraying down all the corners and cracks with rubberized sealant.
Using a can of Flex Seal that you can get at your local hardware store, we went around the entire perimeter of the bus, spraying down all the cracks, spraying down all the holes, anything that could potentially cause a problem when we started to paint. Everything got sealed.
Step 12.
Rust-Oleum Prime with 2 coats.
We went through the bus and used a Rust-Oleum primer and used a thick paintbrush and painted all the corners of the bus.
Then we went through with just a paint tray and a roller and put down the first coat, let it dry, came back 24 hours later, put down the second coat.
And now we're primed. Step 13.
Rust-Oleum Protective Enamel, 2 coats.
We used a bright safety yellow as our protective enamel color.
Because why not, right? Word to the wise, though, this stuff does not come off. I have it on my truck. I have it. It's on the gate at the storage facility.
She even got it on the front counter at the local Chipotle.
Oops. But guess what? Now our bus is ready to convert.